The Balkans, one of Europe's most fiercely contested regions, hides a genetic mystery that has puzzled scientists for years. Wars have been fought over it, empires have claimed it, and cultures have collided here for millennia. Yet, despite this never-ending movement of people, Balkan DNA has remained strikingly unique. How is that possible? What makes the people of this region genetically different from the rest of Europe? And could the answer to this question rewrite everything we thought we knew about European ancestry? To understand why Balkan DNA is so distinct, we need to go back, way back, to the last ice age, when much of Europe was covered in ice. While glaciers forced ancient populations in the north to flee or disappear, the Balkans remained one of the few habitable places. This meant that some of the oldest bloodlines in Europe survived here, uninterrupted, for tens of thousands of years. Even today, genetic studies reveal that Balkan DNA carries the markers of these ancient hunter-gatherers, making it one of the most direct links to Europe's prehistoric past. But that was just the beginning. As civilizations rose and fell, the Balkans became a crossroads of history. Illyrians, Thracians, and Dacians, mysterious tribes that ruled the region long before Rome, left their mark on the DNA of modern Balkan people. Unlike the Celts or other ancient groups that were absorbed and erased, these tribes never fully disappeared. Their genetic imprint can still be traced in Balkan populations today, proving that the bloodlines of these early civilizations have endured for thousands of years. Then came the Romans. The empire that shaped much of Europe should have left a major genetic footprint here, right? Wrong. What scientists found was shocking. Despite centuries of Roman rule, there's almost no genetic contribution from Italic peoples in the Balkans. Instead, DNA evidence shows a massive influx of people from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, during the Roman period. These Anatolians mixed with the local Balkan population, leaving a long-lasting genetic signature that still exists today. But why weren't the Romans themselves part of this genetic equation? One reason could be that Rome relied more on cultural assimilation rather than mass colonization. The Balkans became Roman in language, law, and lifestyle, but genetically, it remained something else entirely. But Rome was only one chapter in the Balkan story. Over the centuries, the region saw the arrival of Goths, Huns, and Avars, so-called barbarian, groups that stormed across Europe. Their influence was undeniable, but here's the twist. While their presence is well documented in historical records, their genetic legacy in the Balkans is surprisingly small. Some individuals buried in the region show signs of steppe ancestry, even skull deformations linked to Hunnic practices. But overall, these groups were either absorbed or simply didn't settle in large enough numbers to leave a lasting genetic impact. So, if the Romans didn't reshape the gene pool and the barbarian invasions left little trace, what did? The answer is the Slavic migrations of the early medieval period. This was not just a military conquest. It was one of the largest population movements in European history. Entire Slavic-speaking communities moved south, mixing with the local populations and creating the genetic landscape we see today. But even after this enormous shift, Balkan DNA remained unique. The ancient bloodlines of Illyrians, Thracians, and Dacians weren't erased. They blended with the new arrivals, preserving the deep genetic roots of the region. This is why the Balkans stand apart from the rest of Europe. Unlike Western Europe, which saw repeated waves of migration that reshaped its genetic makeup, the Balkans remained a melting pot where new influences mixed with incredibly old ones. It is a place where prehistoric DNA still lingers, where ancient tribes still whisper through the genes of modern people, and where the legacies of forgotten civilizations continue to shape identity. So, the next time you hear about the Balkans as a land of division, remember this. Beneath the surface, the DNA tells a different story. A story of survival, endurance, and one of the most unique genetic legacies in the world. The genetic makeup of the Balkans holds a secret buried deep within its past. Unlike any other region in Europe, the Balkans have served as a meeting point for civilizations, invaders, and settlers for thousands of years. But what does this mean for their DNA? To understand this, we need to go back to the very first inhabitants of this land. The Balkans have been inhabited since the Paleolithic era, with some of the earliest human migrations passing through this region. But it was during the Neolithic Revolution, around 8,000 years ago, that a major shift took place. The first farmers, originating from Anatolia, brought agriculture, new technologies, and most importantly, their genes. However, they didn't replace the hunter-gatherer populations already living in the region. Instead, they mixed. This early genetic fusion created a foundation that would continue evolving for thousands of years. Then came the Bronze Age, bringing Indo-European migrations that would reshape Europe. The Yamnaya people from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, known for their advanced use of horses and metal tools, introduced a completely new genetic component to the Balkans. Their arrival didn't just alter the DNA of the region, it also influenced the very languages spoken here. Many linguists believe that the roots of modern Slavic languages trace back to these early migrations. But the Balkans were never a place of isolation. Throughout antiquity, they were at the crossroads of some of the most powerful empires: Greek, Roman, Byzantine, and Ottoman. The genetic traces of these empires still linger in Balkan DNA today. The Roman Empire, for example, left behind a complex genetic legacy. But surprisingly, despite centuries of Roman rule, recent studies show that the impact of Italian descent on Balkan DNA is minimal. Instead, the Balkans saw a massive influx of Anatolian ancestry during the Roman period, showing how Eastern influences shaped the region more than Western ones. Then came one of the most dramatic shifts in Balkan history, the arrival of the Slavs. Unlike the earlier migrations that happened over centuries, this was a rapid and large-scale movement of people. Genetic analysis shows that Slavic ancestry makes up a significant portion, between 30% to 60%, of modern Balkan populations. But here's the interesting part. The further south you go, the lower the Slavic genetic influence becomes. For example, in Serbia and Croatia, it is at its peak, but as you move toward Greece and the Aegean, it starts to decline. This is why even regions that don't speak Slavic languages today, like Greece, still show traces of Slavic ancestry. But Balkan DNA isn't just about migrations. It also tells a story of survival. The rugged mountains, deep valleys, and isolated villages of the Balkans helped preserve ancient genetic lineages that might have disappeared elsewhere in Europe. Even today, certain Balkan communities carry some of the highest percentages of Y chromosome haplogroup I2, which dates back to the Ice Age. This makes the Balkans a living time capsule, holding onto pieces of human history that are tens of thousands of years old. Balkan DNA is a unique blend, shaped by war and peace, migration and isolation, conquest and resistance. But what's even more fascinating is that this genetic diversity isn't just a thing of the past. It's still evolving today. The Balkans have always been a genetic puzzle. Unlike Western Europe, where migrations often followed predictable patterns, the Balkans have seen waves of movement from every direction: north, south, east, and west. But what truly sets Balkan DNA apart is not just who came here, but how these populations interacted over time. One of the biggest factors in the region's unique genetic landscape is its geography. The Balkans are covered in rugged mountains, deep river valleys, and dense forests, which created natural barriers that shaped migration patterns. Unlike the open plains of Central Europe, where large groups could move freely, the Balkans fragmented populations, allowing some genetic lineages to survive in near isolation for thousands of years. This is why certain ancient genetic markers are still present in small villages today, barely touched by later migrations. Another key reason for the distinctiveness of Balkan DNA is its history of conquest and resistance. Unlike many regions that were fully absorbed into larger empires, the Balkans have always been a contested frontier. The Thracians, Illyrians, and Dacians were among the first civilizations here, and while they were eventually influenced by Greek and Roman cultures, their genetic impact remained strong. Even after centuries of rule by foreign powers, local populations often retained their distinct identity, something that is still reflected in their DNA today. But the Balkans were not just a passive recipient of migrations. They also exported their own people to distant lands. One of the most overlooked aspects of Balkan history is the continuous movement of its people outward. During the Roman period, many Balkan-born soldiers, officials, and even emperors spread their lineage across the empire. In the medieval period, Balkan mercenaries served in the armies of Byzantium, the Ottomans, and even Western European kingdoms. This outward movement means that traces of Balkan DNA can be found as far away as Italy, Spain, and even parts of the Middle East. However, not all migrations were peaceful. The Balkan Peninsula has experienced some of the most brutal conflicts in European history, from the Byzantine-Ottoman Wars to the medieval struggles between Slavic states. These conflicts didn't just reshape borders, they reshaped the very DNA of the people. Some genetic lineages were wiped out, while others became dominant due to shifting power structures. This is why Balkan DNA today shows evidence of rapid genetic turnover during certain historical periods, with some lineages declining while others suddenly expanded. One of the most fascinating aspects of Balkan DNA is its ability to preserve ancient genetic signals despite all this turmoil. While Western Europe saw a relatively steady blending of populations, the Balkans have maintained genetic pockets of uniqueness, traces of ancient peoples that no longer exist elsewhere. In some regions, scientists have found genetic links going back to the Neolithic farmers of Anatolia, the Bronze Age warriors of the steppe, and even hunter-gatherers who roamed these lands before agriculture even existed. In the modern era, the genetic distinctiveness of the Balkans continues to evolve. With globalization, migration patterns are changing once again. But despite all the movement, the deep genetic roots of the Balkans remain intact, a testament to the region's resilience and historical complexity. The Balkans have been shaped by some of the most complex migration patterns in human history. But DNA doesn't just record who moved where. It also reveals how different populations mixed, adapted, and evolved. Unlike other parts of Europe, where migration waves often replaced earlier populations, the Balkans experienced layered integration, where new arrivals merged with existing groups rather than displacing them entirely. This is a key reason why the region's genetic diversity remains exceptionally high. One of the most surprising aspects of Balkan DNA is the extreme variation between regions. Unlike France, Germany, or even Italy, where genetic shifts occur gradually across the landscape, the Balkans present sharp genetic contrasts over short distances. In one village, you might find DNA markers linked to ancient Thracians or Illyrians, while just a few miles away, the genetic profile might resemble that of Slavic migrants or Ottoman-era settlers. This patchwork effect is due to centuries of fragmented governance, localized migrations, and cultural isolation in certain areas. Another unique feature of Balkan DNA is the persistence of ancient genetic markers that have disappeared elsewhere in Europe. While Western and Central Europe saw massive genetic turnovers during the migration period, parts of the Balkans acted as genetic time capsules, preserving lineages from prehistoric populations. Scientists have discovered that some communities still carry distinct genetic traits from the first Neolithic farmers who arrived over 8,000 years ago, while others show strong continuity with the Bronze Age warrior societies that once ruled the region. But it's not just about ancestry. Balkan DNA also carries evidence of adaptation. Over thousands of years, populations in the region developed genetic traits that helped them survive in an environment marked by frequent conflict, harsh winters, and mountainous terrain. Some studies suggest that certain immune system adaptations found in Balkan populations may have originated as a defense against the waves of plagues and diseases that ravaged Europe during the medieval period. Other genetic markers indicate resistance to nutritional deficiencies, possibly due to food shortages during historical sieges and wars. One of the most overlooked aspects of Balkan DNA is the influence of small but impactful migrations. While much attention is given to large-scale movements, like the arrival of Slavic populations or the expansion of the Roman Empire, smaller migrations also left deep genetic imprints. Sephardic Jews fleeing persecution in Spain settled in Balkan cities and subtly influenced the gene pool. Armenian merchants, who traveled along Ottoman trade routes, left genetic traces in certain regions. Even small groups of Germanic tribes that passed through during the collapse of the Roman Empire contributed to the Balkan genetic landscape. These minor but continuous migrations are part of what makes the region's DNA so unique. Interestingly, genetic studies have also revealed unexpected connections between Balkan populations and people from distant regions. Some lineages found in modern-day Balkan individuals have links to ancient Anatolian populations, while others show faint traces of Central Asian or even Middle Eastern ancestry, likely due to historical trade networks and imperial expansions. This interconnectivity challenges traditional narratives that depict the Balkans as an isolated frontier and instead highlights its role as a critical bridge between civilizations. Despite all this diversity, Balkan DNA also reveals something fascinating: a core genetic foundation that has remained surprisingly stable over time. No matter how many migrations have occurred, or how many empires have ruled the region, certain genetic markers continue to persist across generations. This means that, in a way, modern Balkan populations are living relics of thousands of years of history, carrying within them the stories of all who came before. The uniqueness of Balkan DNA doesn't just come from its deep historical layers. It also lies in the way it reflects centuries of survival, resilience, and cultural fusion. Unlike many other European populations, the genetic landscape of the Balkans doesn't follow a simple pattern of expansion and replacement. Instead, it tells a story of constant adaptation, shifting alliances, and deeply rooted continuity. One of the most intriguing aspects of Balkan DNA is the presence of highly diverse Y-chromosome haplogroups, which reveal a complex paternal lineage that extends across multiple ancient civilizations. While much of Europe is dominated by a few genetic lineages, the Balkans contain an unparalleled mix of European, Near Eastern, and even steppe-related paternal markers. Scientists have traced the origins of haplogroups like I2, which is especially prevalent in the Western Balkans, to early hunter-gatherers who lived in Europe over 15,000 years ago. At the same time, other paternal markers, such as R1a and R1b, connect Balkan populations to the Indo-European migrations that swept across Eurasia thousands of years later. But what makes the Balkans even more distinct is the matrilineal, maternal, genetic continuity. While Y-chromosome lineages often reflect male-dominated migration patterns, such as warrior groups moving into new territories, mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited only from the mother, shows a different story. Studies suggest that while foreign armies and ruling elites may have arrived in waves, local women maintained remarkable genetic continuity, preserving ancient maternal lineages that date back to the earliest Neolithic settlers of the region. This unique pattern highlights how Balkan populations absorb new influences without losing their deep ancestral roots. Another extraordinary feature of Balkan DNA is its genetic resistance to external pressures. While other parts of Europe saw significant genetic shifts due to massive invasions, such as the Germanic movements into the Western Roman Empire, the Balkans absorbed and reshaped incoming groups, maintaining a more localized genetic identity. Even when the Ottoman Empire ruled the region for centuries, the genetic impact of Turkish populations on Balkan DNA remained surprisingly limited. This suggests that, despite cultural and political changes, the core genetic structure of the Balkans remained largely intact. One of the biggest genetic puzzles in the Balkans is the presence of isolated genetic enclaves. These are small communities that, despite being surrounded by more dominant populations, have retained unique genetic signatures that don't fully match their neighbors. Scientists believe that certain remote villages in Montenegro, Albania, and parts of Greece may still carry traces of pre-Slavic, pre-Roman populations who avoided assimilation. In some cases, even linguistic and cultural elements of these ancient groups have survived, further proving the unbroken connection between modern-day people and their ancient ancestors. What's even more fascinating is how Balkan DNA reflects an intense history of both division and unity. While historical conflicts have created sharp political and cultural divisions, the genetic data tells a different story. Across modern national borders, populations in Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, and even Bulgaria and Romania share common ancestral markers. In fact, many of the supposed differences between ethnic groups in the region are more cultural than genetic. This challenges long-standing narratives about identity and suggests that the people of the Balkans are far more connected than political histories might suggest. Another genetic anomaly in the Balkans is the high frequency of certain health-related genetic traits. Some genetic markers found in Balkan populations are associated with greater resistance to cold temperatures, an adaptation likely shaped by the mountainous terrain and harsh winters. Other markers show increased bone density and muscle endurance, possibly linked to centuries of survival in rugged environments that required intense physical resilience. Interestingly, Certain Balkan populations also exhibit genetic adaptations related to diet, particularly in the metabolism of dairy products. Unlike many parts of Asia and Africa, where lactose intolerance is common, Balkan populations show some of the highest lactase persistence rates in Europe, likely due to their long history of dairy farming and pastoralism. Perhaps one of the most unexpected revelations from genetic studies in the Balkans is the region's connection to ancient seafarers. Some mitochondrial DNA lineages in coastal areas, particularly along the Adriatic and Aegean coasts, trace back to maritime cultures that thrived during the Bronze Age. This suggests that the Balkans were not just a landlocked migration corridor, but also played a key role in ancient Mediterranean trade networks, connecting the region to places as far as Egypt, the Levant, and even the Iberian Peninsula. Ultimately, what makes Balkan DNA truly one of a kind is its layered complexity. Every wave of migration, every empire, every historical upheaval left an imprint. But instead of erasing the past, these influences blended together, creating a genetic landscape unlike any other in Europe. The Balkans are not defined by a single ancestry or heritage, but by a dynamic, ever-evolving mosaic of peoples, cultures, and histories. One of the most fascinating aspects of Balkan DNA is how it reflects the hidden migrations that history barely recorded. While ancient texts and archaeological finds give us part of the story, genetics has revealed entire population shifts that were once invisible. These movements didn't just shape the Balkans, they helped define the genetic fabric of Europe itself. One of the most overlooked migrations in Balkan history is the movement of Neolithic farmers from Anatolia and the Near East. While these early agriculturalists are well documented in Western Europe, recent DNA analysis has shown that the Balkans played a crucial role in spreading farming across the continent. However, unlike in other regions, Balkan hunter-gatherers were not fully displaced. Instead, they mixed with incoming farmers, creating a unique genetic signature that persists in Balkan populations today. This blending of Mesolithic hunter-gatherer and Neolithic farmer lineages makes the Balkans one of the few regions where both groups coexisted and shaped the genetic landscape together. But the migrations didn't stop there. The Balkans became a genetic melting pot during the Bronze Age, with new groups arriving from the Pontic-Caspian steppe. These people, often associated with the Yamnaya culture, introduced genetic traits linked to height, lactose tolerance, and even immunity to certain diseases. This wave of migration was critical in shaping the Indo-European languages spoken across Europe today. However, what makes the Balkans unique is how these newcomers integrated into existing populations rather than completely replacing them. Unlike in Central and Northern Europe, where Yamnaya ancestry became dominant in the Balkans, it blended with earlier groups, leading to a distinct genetic legacy. One of the most mysterious migrations revealed by genetic studies is the presence of Celtic DNA in the Balkans. Ancient records mention the Gallic invasions of the 3rd century BCE, but the genetic evidence suggests that Celts didn't just raid the region, they stayed. DNA from Iron Age Balkan sites shows a clear signal of genetic contributions from Western Europe, matching populations from France and the British Isles. This means that some ancient Balkan populations were not purely Thracian or Illyrian, as previously thought, but had a strong Celtic component. Even today, certain Y chromosome markers common in Western Europe are found in small pockets of the Balkans, possibly remnants of these early Celtic settlers. But genetics doesn't just define history, it also impacts modern health and medicine. Studies have shown that the high frequency of Y-DNA haplogroup I2 in the Western Balkans correlates with certain inherited conditions, such as predispositions to cardiovascular diseases and specific metabolic disorders. On the other hand, the presence of E1B1B, which entered the Balkans from North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean, has been linked to higher resilience to certain infections and inflammatory diseases. This means that the genetic legacy of ancient migrations isn't just an academic topic. It actively influences health trends in the Balkans today. Beyond health, Balkan genetics even plays a role in language preservation and cultural identity. The Slavic expansion in the early medieval period introduced a strong genetic and linguistic imprint, but deep pre-Slavic Balkan ancestry remains evident in regional dialects, folklore, and even place names. For example, Genetic studies show that populations in northern Greece and parts of Bulgaria carry up to 30% of the same genetic markers found in early Slavic settlers, which correlates with linguistic influences in those regions. Yet, at the same time, the persistence of pre-Slavic markers, especially in Albania and parts of the Dalmatian coast, aligns with languages and traditions that resisted full assimilation. Even in the modern era, political and social structures in the Balkans have been subtly shaped by genetic ancestry. Studies have shown that regions with high genetic continuity from ancient populations tend to have stronger local identities, often leading to a greater emphasis on regional autonomy and cultural preservation. This is one reason why the Balkans, despite being geographically compact, remains one of Europe's most culturally and politically fragmented regions. At its core, Balkan DNA isn't just a relic of the past. It's a living narrative that continues to shape the health, identity, languages, and even geopolitics of the region. Understanding this genetic legacy not only helps explain historical events, but also unlocks insights into the future of Balkan populations.